Welcome to Reconstruction. It's easy for us to become immersed in our daily routine to the point that we can forego the world that surrounds us. The commons. Our daily fixation of being aware, keeping up to date, and staying informed on whatever interest we have, we can easily lose track of the environment and community that surrounds us. This is the tragedy of the commons. It's invisible. It's not really invisible. In fact, whenever you step outside and take your pets down to the park, visit your local library, make a trip to your favorite national park, or even browse the internet, we are participating in the commons, forgetting the easy access we have to these things. The commons are everywhere, but they are fragile in nature, and with their access to the public being constantly challenged, this should remind us of the vulnerability of the commons being taken away from us. The commons' very purpose is to allow people to come together, share ideas, provide spaces to communicate, and offer a break from the daily routine of reality by connecting us together as a society. As Raj Patel writes in his book, The Value of Nothing, quote, "The value of the commons is beyond reckoning. Before we can protect it, we have to see it, and that's no small task." The idea of the commons as a political or social commodity to be protected is nothing new. As a 1641 Massachusetts ordinance declared, quote, "Any man may pass on foot through any man's property to fish or fowl of the commons ponds," end quote. Early settlers also embraced what historians referred to as a civic republican, to a view where private property served a civic purpose. A Northwest Ordinance of 1787 also declared that the waterways along the Midwest shall be common highways and forever free. Thomas Jefferson highlighted the importance of the commons, speaking in favor of every citizen having access to the land. The Romans even believed that some things are common by their very nature, and this included air, wildlife, and navigable waterways, further emphasizing that government does not own these things and therefore cannot privatize them. They belong to everyone. Today, the commons in our daily conversation is missing. We participate in their spaces on a daily basis, but we ignore the continued encroachment by corporations. In economics, the impact on our environment and the infringement on our commons is considered an externality. As Investopia defines it, an externality is, quote, "a consequence of economic activity experienced by unrelated third parties. It can be either a positive or negative. Pollution emitted by a factory that spoils the surrounding environment and affects the health of nearby residents is an example of a negative externality. The effect of well-educated labor force on the productivity of a company is an example of a positive externality." The impact of externalities on our commons is important to note moving forward. As the most recent debate and protest by the indigenous groups surrounding the Dakota Access Pipeline was centered around the potential negative externalities the pipeline would have on their water, environment, and destroying their ancestral burial grounds. The protests of Dakota Access Pipeline and even the protests over XL Pipeline were both participated on the very idea of preserving the commons. The contamination of an ever-shrinking water source and the less land that people will be able to live on with increasing temperatures because of climate change is a real growing concern. While at the same time, the commons is as abstract as the internet. At this very moment, the debate over net neutrality has been brought back into focus as we have the real potential of our internet becoming less free and more controlled by a monopolized few. The internet itself was created through public funding and is utilized by everyone, allowing users to communicate across the world and even create jobs, foundations, and spark movements. To monitor the speed at which certain businesses, groups, and people will have to pay in order to have access to the internet or reach an audience or communicate with each other is another barrier that's being propped up. With everything that the commons offer us, why does it still need protecting? It's not just corporations who feel threatened on the future investments when people try to defend the commons. It also can become an ideological debate. Private property is central to US politics and the commons. Most people consider owning property and being able to purchase property as participating in the American dream. This is an area where both liberals and conservatives can agree on. The divide revolves on how much property can people own, how much property should they own. But it wasn't always this way. Austrian economist Wilhelm Reich wrote in his greatly influencing book A Humane Economy, quote, "that the highest interests of community and the indispensable things of life have no exchange value and are neglected of supply and demand, and are allowed to dominate the field. The supporters of the market economy do its worst service by not observing its limits and conditions," end quote. While philosopher Edmund Burke wrote that the society is a partnership, quote, "not only between those who are living, but between those who are living, those who are dead, and those who are to be born." Both of these conservative political philosophers saw the importance of preserving the commons for the public good. The concept of private property is connected to the idea of freedom and democracy. Political philosopher Henry George wrote in Progress and Poverty book, quote, "The true remedy to the problem of income inequality was nothing more or less than to make the land common property. While Jonathan Rowe in Our Commonwealth puts it more bluntly, speaking on how today's mainstream economists think, stating, quote, "He goes through life with a relentless calculus of personal loss and gain. Basically, he has the emotional development of a 3-year-old, only with better math skills." We can begin rewriting the rules of how we look at private property, taking from Brazil's constitution. Property shall fulfill a social function, end quote. This is not a claim we have to take everyone who owns private land and share it with everyone. It merely means we should make sure large swaths of land that do exist aren't taken by the government or individuals, and that their function is shared for the public's purpose and not to the detriment of. Taking, for example, our food and water is essential for life. Without them, our race will go extinct. Yet these resources are being used up, politically controlled, and patented to the point where farmers go into debt because of the monopoly of seeds by corporations like Monsanto. In some cases, this has led to 250,000 suicides in India, the largest ever recorded, while China, on the other hand, has seen a rise in suicide due to the expansion of urbanization, while Australia, which had the largest growth of suicides in 2015 because of the worsening drought. With the more severe weather changes, the more fragile our land, water, and oceans will become, and the more political control will be enabled. Aaron Sagan reflected on the continuous impact of climate change, stating, "Meanwhile, the stomach-turning joke is that all our greenhouse gas-emitting resources, land, travel, energy, labor, livestock, and so on, produce food that we do not even eat. The Food and Agriculture Organizations estimate that 1/3 of the food produced in the world is wasted, approximately 1.3 billion metric tons." This reflecting the idea of both the overuse of our resources as well as the political control people have on our commons. But that's the problem. We can't have a functioning society unless we share resources. With the rise of income inequality and continued production of greenhouse gases, the more difficult and scarce land will become. The commons will be only more at risk, as those with the most wealth will try in desperate attempts to hoard what land, water, food they can, while the larger public suffers. As Raj Patel wrote in The Value of Nothing, quote, "Private property requires the society to approve of it being taken out of the common hands. Property is, in other words, social. There's nothing natural about the way some people are allowed to exclude others from the land, for instance." And this gets down to the very simple idea. We need to be aware of our consumption. Our consumption of resources leads many to forgo this conversation altogether, but we need to understand our resources are limited. Our concern over consumption wasn't always this difficult to talk about, though. President Theodore Roosevelt saw the importance of preserving land by stating, "We have become great because of the lavish use of resources, but the time has come to inquire seriously what will happen when our forests are gone, when the coal, the iron, the oil, and the gases are exhausted. When the soils have still further impoverished and washed into the streams, polluting the rivers, denuding the fields, and obstructing navigation." And it is because of this realization in 1901, after being elected president, Roosevelt created the United States Forest Services, USFS. And in 1906, with the enabling of the American Antiques Act, Roosevelt established 150 national forests, 51 federal bird reserves, 4 national game preserves, and 5 national parks, and 18 national monuments. With this, Roosevelt was able to protect 230 million acres of public land. 150 was set aside for national parks. His goal was to, quote, "ensure the sustainability of those resources." In the 1960s, the environmental movements pushed Nixon's administration to create the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, in 1970, as well as passing the Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act of 1972. Currently, with the newly appointed leadership of the EPA and the continued pressures by corporations to further privatize more land, we should again remind ourselves of Roosevelt's initial concern of overusing our resources and use his initiatives as inspiration for how we could move forward and once again take back and protect public land. The commons are by their very nature democratic. Their purpose can provide us with possibilities of seeing new solutions. As an article in Yes Magazine talked about the economic decline, it also spoke of looking to the commons. Quote, "Being rewritten today as many Americans rediscover the advantages of cities inviting public spaces, rich cultural diversity, and a creative environment that nurtures startups and attracts talent." End quote. As cities begin to see a huge influx of millennials coming into their city, the city was worried about the overbearing effects of gentrification. Yet instead, quote, Philadelphia's early efforts shows promise that urban revitalization does not inevitably translate to gentrification and dislocation, in which lower-income people are shoved away when neighborhoods bounce back economically. The stark boundaries, rich versus poor, black and brown versus white, begin to break down as people share parks, trails, libraries, nature centers, and other gathering places. We have many challenges ahead, and with all the difficulties we face in our politics, cities, and daily lives, it can be overwhelming. But change is possible, and if we want to maintain some sort of form of democratic governance, we have to acknowledge the world around us. The commons are everywhere. We just have to be willing to look around and notice them. And this concludes episode 3, The Commons. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Feel free to subscribe if you guys like this channel, you like what I'm doing. Feel free to go like and leave comments if you have any questions. See you guys in the next video.